All right, so the final portion of the creation of this multi-view drawing is going to be adding in our various dimensions, okay? So we've already done that in the sketch. That, again, is the beauty of the sketch. Dimensions we're not going to add that are on here is we're not going to add the dimension for the space between the views. We're not going to add these overall dimensions. Those were just for us. The ones we're going to add are the ones that are touching the object directly. And so this sketch really helps us because we did most of the work when we were doing the sketch. This was the hard part. The easy part is really just transferring it into the pretty final format. It's kind of like how outlining an essay is the hardest part of writing an essay. And once you go into fill in the blank, it's just a little bit of wordsmithing. So we can pick any of these dimensions that we want to start with. I'm going to just start with these ones on the front view. Well, actually, we could just add all the dimension or the extension lines right now. If we remember, the extension lines extend off of the edges of the object. So I'm going to add those in now. I will start with these, but then I'm going to add these and then I'll add these. So we'll just throw those on there. And I'm using, again, you want to keep these very light. I'm going to use 4H, but I'm going to make them a little darker than you probably should. We want to leave that about a 1/16 of an inch gap in there. So I'm going to make these light because we can always darken them later. And just like on the sketch, I'm going to overextend them a little bit, just like I did also with the projection lines, so that I have a lot of room to work with, and then I'll come back and clean them up later. While I'm working with horizontal lines, I'll add these top ones up here, leaving a gap for each spot. Oh, there we go. We're going to start that one over there, and this one just barely touching that object. So sometimes the extension lines do run over the edge of the object, and it's hard to see the gap I left there, but again, we're going to darken these at the end and clean everything up really nice. And you don't want to get these confused with your projection lines that you had on here, because they are going to be similar. So if it helps you, it may not be a bad idea to sneak in there and just erase a little bit, since these are going to be different lines. And that may help you to avoid any confusion with those existing lines. But a lot of your projection lines are going to be very similar to the actual extension lines that you're using for your object. So using to dimension your object, rather. I'm going to add one here. I'm going to add one here. Add one here. Oh, come on. Sometimes things get a little sticky. There it is. There, and one right here. Now that I have all my extension lines in place, again, we'll clean up a little bit. These are bugging me up here. All of our extension lines are in place. Now we can add in the dimension lines and then ultimately the dimensions. If we remember, for spacing, right, we want the first dimension to be at least 3/8 of an inch away. It's hard to see, but I do have a line scratched onto, there it is, scratched onto my triangle. Plus we have the piece of acrylic on our T-squares. And worst comes to worst, you can just measure. You can, find the 1/8 of an inch mark on here and just measure 3/8 of an inch. That works as well. But I like to make it easy on myself. If you really want, you can also actually, grab yourself some piece of paper, like a sticky note or something, and it works pretty well to mark out that distance on one of these. So if you were to go, for instance, like this, and make a little mark, stick it under there, make a mark. Now you can use that to mark your distances here. So our first dimension would start there, and so on. So you can do this however you want. I'm going to use my triangle. That's easiest for me, but you can do this however you like. So we know we're going to have one dimension right here. I'll put the line on that spot. Oh, come on, right there. I'm going to draw a light line. We know we want another one about 3/8 of an inch away from that. 1/4 to a 3/8 of an inch is what you can do for the rest of your dimensions after the first one. So this is going to be the full height. Okay. let's do these ones up here. And would you look at that? They're going to be pretty dang similar to the ones down there. So I probably could have cheated and not even moved this at all. So we'll have, oops, let's go from here to here. Sometimes I have to go back and check. Yeah, so we're going to have one up here and then the bigger one. That's why we have the sketch. And then you can just line that line on your triangle up with the last dimension line you drew. And let's get these horizontal ones in here. So I'm going to line the wood up with the edge of the object. Checking my sketch, I'm going to have 1, 2, and then the big one. So we'll go 1, 2. I'm not even going to lift up my pencil. I'm just going to draw a line for both. Slide this down on top of that line I just drew and draw one all the way across. Now, these are pretty faint, but they're there. Okay, you want to keep them light. You want to keep them super light. Okay, I'm going to write the numbers in now. If we remember, we want to have 1/8 of an inch height on them. And my recommendation is to use this widest opening to make your little marks so you know where to put your guidelines. So if we're going to do fractions, our fractions can actually be 1/4 of an inch. So then you might want to use your scale. So this dimension, for instance, here is going to be 3/8, or it's going to be 3/4 of an inch. What I'm going to do is actually just make, since this is about 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to make a mark, and then I'm going to slide this down to the second mark and do another mark. And that's going to be about the 1/8 of an inch that we want. And I didn't center that too well in there. So sometimes you may want to redo that, center it a little better. So there to there, there to there. And now this is where you're going to draw your guidelines across. So if you do like I did and you just do some multiple lines. So the top fraction will go up here, the bottom fraction will go down here. So that was 3/4 of an inch. I'll go 3/4. And this is where your lettering is really going to come in. That slash was a little too crazy. So you don't want to make things too crazy. And remember, we're going to darken all the other lines later. This is just for now. Next, I want 1.5 inches there on that bigger one. And I already kind of decided where I'm going to put it. So let's first we'll do a mark here and here. And another strategy you can use for that fraction is put in these guidelines and then say, all right, I'm going to eyeball the middle of that. I'm going to do the top of the fraction there and the bottom down here. So here's the bottom of my fraction and the top of my fraction. And you might be like, oh, that's so many lines, but it gets easier over time. So this will be 1, and what did I say? 1/2 and 1/2. Okay, so that's in there now. And I look for these guidelines. I like to see those guidelines on there to know that you're doing them. So I'm going to zip through here and I'm going to put in these other marks. So we've got up here at the top, 3/4, 1 1/4. So the 3/4 is going to go here. So we'll have dot, dot, dot. And the 1 1/4, let's do it down a little lower. So this extension line is going to stop here. We'll just get rid of that. And look at that little opening. That looks good for our 1 1/4 mark. So we'll go 1. Guidelines. So we have 3/4. We have, where is it? Sometimes I get lost a little bit. Oh, there it is. 1 and 1/4. Okay. And of course, we'll come back later and clean everything up. Down here, we're going to have 1/2, 1, and 2 for the big one. So I'm going to do a big one above that, and then down below. What did I say? 1/2, 1. And so for these, you can see it's kind of easy to center when you're doing the horizontal lines. Let's do the 2 over here a little further. So we'll do the 2. So And now you're going to see these guidelines all just kind of melt away when you darken everything. So this one was 1/2. We have 1, and then we have 2. Right? And those guidelines are really going to help us a lot. Guidelines are even more important when you end up doing notes. So we're not going to darken those guidelines now. We're just going to come in here and we're going to darken all of the extension lines and the dimension lines, and that's going to give us a really clean look here. And this is where we have to remember we only need an extension line to go maybe 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch past the dimension line, which is going to be the one that has the arrows on it. So I'm going to darken. You can add the arrows now or you can add them after. I'm going to darken first and then come back and add the arrows later. I'm going to switch also to a 2H pencil, which I seem to have misplaced. Where are all my 2H pencils? Oh, there it is. Okay, 2H. 2H pencil is a good pencil for doing dimensions and other things like that. So I'm going to darken. So this one's going to end right about there. And so again, you're going about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch past the final dimension line that you're going to. This one isn't going to cut through the dimension line for the 1.5 inches. It's going to stop right about here. So I'm going to extend that off the object to right about there. And this part, it's a little artistic in a way. You don't necessarily have to be super regimented about things. You may need to climb in there with an eraser to clean things up a little bit and make sure things look nice and sharp and pretty. And then we can also get in here for those dimension lines. So you can really do this in any order that you want or need to. At this point, it's not too big of a deal. What really matters is probably that you want to start drawing those extension lines, then do the dimension lines, and then add in your numbers and figures. So that will be that. And so you can keep going like this. And the other recommendation here is that you should wait to add those arrows until the very end, because if you realize as you're darkening that you've messed one of these up, you may later on want to correct that. And if you've already drawn your arrows and they're super dark, you're going to be in a world of hurt. I'm going to add this arrow on the outside, so I'm going to put an extension line out there. Because you're going to have these super dark arrow marks on your page, and you are not going to enjoy trying to erase those because it does not work well. So you can see I'm kind of jumping around. I'm not going to extend this extension line through the number 2. I'm just going to bring it past the dimension line for the 1. Same with this one. Does not need to go all the way. It just needs to go long enough so that we can see that it's touching the other one. And then I'm going to clean up so that these don't look like they're extending infinitely into space. This one too. And this is where it can be really helpful to get in with the eraser shield if you've got a line that you're like, get out of their line, but you can't really get to it too good. The eraser shield can help you to block out the parts that you don't want to accidentally erase. Do this last setup here. And you won't be talking when you're doing this. You will just be drawing these lines, so it will probably go a little faster. And we want to remember where that extension line started. So that one starts there on the actual object with a little bit of a gap. I'm going to move the camera. At the risk of it being out of focus, let's focus it. Hey, we see that gap. So it's hard to see from up there, but there is in fact a gap. Pull this up and away. There we go. Refocus. All right. Fix this extension line and darken our dimension lines. And last but not least, I will put some arrows on this. And so some of these were a little cramped. That's probably not too good that I had that so cramped in there, but that's going to happen sometimes. But I'm going to just put these arrows on. And my recommendation for drawing the arrows is start at the spot. Let me get in closer again. start at the spot, there we go, where it meets the, some light, oh, look at that. Start at the spot where it meets the, where the dimension line meets the extension line and pull back. So dimension line meets the extension line, pull back. Dimension line meets the extension line. We're kind of pulling back along, and then you flare out right at the end, and that's going to give you a real pretty looking arrow. So let's try these over here. It can be trickier when you're trying to do the horizontal ones because you'll have to get your arm in there at a different angle. I'm physically going to stand up and walk over here to do this one. So we do there. Whoops. And sometimes you're going to get a little bit of an ugly arrow, and that's okay. It happens. We'll go like this, here, and here. Here and here. What we see is this one doesn't look like it has two arrows. That's because this arrow is acting as the other outside arrow for the 1/2 inch dimension. Pull back, and you'll get faster at this as time goes on. You want your arrows to be fairly subtle, really. They don't need to be the biggest, darkest things in the world, but you do want them to be obvious so that someone looking at your drawing is going to know where your dimension lines are pointing, which lines are the extension lines. And this is going to be just about done. And again, you may want to clean a little bit if you had some really dark guidelines. You can clean those, but you don't necessarily have to. That is kind of up to you. If you think they're fading away into the background, that might be okay. Just be careful that you don't accidentally nick one of your good dimensions there. And I'm seeing now too, maybe putting the dots with this thing leaves it a bit too dark. You may be able to even get away with using the eraser shield to just physically draw your light guidelines by kind of sliding along the top and bottom edge of that. And that may give you some pretty decent guidelines that you can use. Oh, they're there. So that may even be easier than drawing the guidelines in there with the T-square. So there are about 1,000 ways to do this, and it's really up to you and your particular style what you would prefer to do. This is just one suggested method for creating this. And of course, last but not least, you would come in and I got the sun creeping in here. You would darken your border and make sure your border is all filled out. But this would be the finished drawing, the finished dimension drawing for creating the object that we sketched here in another video, which will be linked in the description, and which we generated from this isometric pictorial view of this particular